The year is 5400 BC. In the scorching heat where two mighty rivers converge into marshlands, a small band of farmers drives wooden stakes deep into rich black earth. They cannot know they're about to birth humanity's greatest transformation. They only understand that this soil drinks the annual floods and gives back abundance, that fish swim thick in reed-choked channels, and that their children might finally escape the endless wandering that has defined human existence since the world began. This delta, cradled between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, will become civilization's stage. Here, in what future peoples will call Mesopotamia, the land between rivers, the seeds of urban life take root in mud that seems ordinary but carries within it the potential to reshape destiny itself. The landscape defies easy description, neither fully land nor water. It shifts with seasons like a living thing. Spring floods transform the region into a vast inland sea, depositing fertile silt that glistens black as obsidian under the desert sun. Summer heat bakes the earth into cracked plates while underground water keeps date palm roots alive. Winter brings respite and renewal, preparing the cycle to begin anew. These early settlers understand water as both master and servant. Too little means death. Too much sweeps away months of labor in a single night. Learning to tame the floods becomes their greatest innovation, one that will echo through millennia. They dig channels to carry excess water from their fields, construct earthen barriers to protect grain stores, and gradually discover that controlling water means controlling life itself. The Ubaid people, as archaeologists later named them, spread throughout southern Mesopotamia like drops of water finding every depression in the landscape. Their villages dot the delta wherever high ground offers refuge from annual flooding. Each settlement begins the same way, a cluster of mud brick houses surrounding a modest shrine, the whole community elevated on packed earth platforms that lifted above flood lines. But Eridu stands apart from the beginning. Founded around 5400 BC on a slight rise overlooking marshes, this settlement becomes the prototype that truly deserves the name city. What begins as another farming village transforms into something unprecedented as generation after generation chooses to expand rather than spread out to found new communities elsewhere. The reasons seem practical at first. Eridu sits at the perfect intersection of river channels and overland routes, making it a natural gathering place for trade and exchange. Yet commerce alone cannot explain the city's magnetic pull. Its true power lies in the sacred complex at its heart. The initial shrine is modest, a simple rectangular building with thick walls and a single doorway facing east toward the rising sun. Inside, the community places offerings to Enki, god of fresh water, who ensures rivers flow and springs bubble up from earth's depths. But this building differs from household shrines found in other villages. It belongs to the entire community, and its priest serves all people rather than merely his own kin. Each generation rebuilds the sanctuary larger and more elaborate than before. Where fathers constructed walls of pressed mud, sons shaped standardized bricks and mortared them with bitumen. Where grandfathers offered prayers from ground level, grandsons build platforms that lift ceremonies closer to heaven. Layer upon layer, century upon century, the sacred structure grows upward like a man-made mountain reaching toward the realm of gods. By 4500 BC, Eridu's religious complex towers over surrounding marshlands, its white painted walls visible for miles throughout the flat delta. Travelers approaching from any direction see it immediately, a beacon of ambition rising from primordial mud, proclaiming that here dwells something greater than mere survival. The sanctuary becomes the beating heart of a new kind of society. Every morning before dawn, farmers stream through the city's gates carrying surplus grain from their fields. Priests weigh each contribution on bronze scales of remarkable precision. Reed styluses scratch records into soft clay tablets, the world's earliest written words, though they contain no poetry or prayers, only the practical business of accounting for barley and livestock, oil and silver. These clay records reveal the economic revolution that transforms Eridu from village to metropolis. The sacred complex serves as granary, treasury, and market all at once. When floods come early and ruin barley crops, families survive on grain stored in the sanctuary's massive chambers. When merchants arrive from eastern mountains carrying obsidian and lapis lazuli, they trade under divine protection for prices priests judge fair. When disputes arise over water rights or property boundaries, religious courts settle them with authority even the proudest farmer accepts. The city spreads outward from the sacred center like ripples on still water. The wealthy build homes on high ground closest to the ziggurats, spacious compounds with multiple rooms arranged around central courtyards, their walls decorated with painted murals depicting abundance and divine favor. These houses contain workshops where artisans craft jewelry and tools for trade, storage rooms filled with goods from throughout the known world, and private shrines where family heads make offerings to household gods. Further from the sanctuary, neighborhoods grow more crowded and practical. Here live the potters and weavers, fishermen and metalworkers whose skills keep the metropolis functioning. Houses share walls to conserve building materials, rooms are smaller and simpler, decorations limited to geometric patterns pressed into wet plaster. Yet even these modest dwellings represent wealth beyond dreams of nomadic ancestors who owned only what they could carry on their backs. The gulf between rich and poor widens with each generation, carved in stone by the size of homes and goods taken to graves. Elite burials contain golden jewelry and carved ivory, bronze weapons and imported stones that speak of trade networks stretching to Earth's ends. Common graves hold simple pottery and copper tools, modest markers of lives lived in service to the greater community. Social stratification crystallizes for the first time in history, yet it emerges gradually enough that each generation accepts as natural what their grandparents might have found shocking. Priests, claiming divine authority to interpret God's will, assume leadership roles extending far beyond religious ceremony. Successful merchants accumulate wealth that allows them to sponsor public works and ceremonial feasts, earning respect that translates into political influence. Skilled craftsmen form specialized guilds controlling access to essential technologies, making their cooperation necessary for the city's prosperity. By 4000 BC, Eridu houses nearly 15,000 souls, a population that would have been unimaginable to nomadic ancestors. Children born within city walls have never known the uncertainty of wandering, the constant search for water and shelter that defined human existence for countless millennia. They take for granted wonders their great-grandparents could not have conceived, streets that lead to specific destinations, neighbors whose names and trades remain constant year after year, shops where desired goods can be found without traveling for weeks. This is no longer a village where everyone knows everyone else's business. Eridu has become something entirely new under the sun, a true metropolis with all possibilities and problems that urban life entails. The transformation spreads throughout southern Mesopotamia as other communities attempt to replicate the city's success. Uruk rises on the Euphrates banks, dedicated to Inanna, goddess of love and war. Uar emerges near the river's mouth, honoring Nanna, the moon god who guides travelers through darkness. Each settlement develops its own character and specializations, yet all follow the pattern established at the delta's edge, a massive religious complex surrounded by neighborhoods arranged according to wealth and occupation. Competition between settlements drives innovation at unprecedented pace. The invention of the potter's wheel revolutionizes ceramic production, allowing artisans to create vessels of startling uniformity and beauty. The development of bronze working transforms both agriculture and warfare, providing tools that last longer and cut deeper than anything ancestors possessed. The domestication of donkeys and invention of wheeled carts makes trade possible over distances that once required weeks of dangerous travel. But the greatest innovation is writing itself. What begins as simple marks pressed into clay to record economic transactions gradually evolves into something more sophisticated. By 3500 BC, Sumerian scribes have developed cuneiform, a system of wedge-shaped marks that can represent not just concrete objects, but abstract concepts, actions, and relationships. The first literature appears not epic poems or religious hymns, but practical manuals for administration, legal codes for settling disputes, and mathematical texts for calculating areas and volumes. The scribal schools become centers of learning where young men from wealthy families master the complex art of writing. These institutions preserve and transmit knowledge across generations, creating the foundation for all future scholarship. The Uruk period, spanning roughly 4000 to 3100 BC, witnesses urbanization on a scale that transforms civilization's entire character. Uruk itself grows to cover nearly 6 square kilometers, its population swelling to perhaps 50,000 inhabitants. The city's influence extends throughout Mesopotamia and beyond, as Uruk-style settlements appear in regions reaching into Anatolia and Iran. This expansion represents humanity's first experiment with something approaching globalization. Uruk merchants established trading posts in distant lands, spreading Mesopotamian innovations while bringing back exotic materials that local craftsmen transform into luxury goods. Standardization of weights and measures facilitates commerce over vast distances. Common artistic motifs and architectural styles create a shared visual culture spanning from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea. The Great Ziggurat of Uruk, reaching toward heaven with its staged terraces and monumental staircases, becomes the architectural symbol of this new age. Standing over 40 meters high, its white limestone casing gleaming in desert sun, the massive structure proclaims ambition on a scale that dwarfs anything previously attempted. Pilgrims journey for weeks to offer prayers at its summit, carrying home stories of wonder that spread Mesopotamian civilization's fame to the known world's ends. Religious concepts evolve alongside urban growth, becoming more sophisticated as they must explain increasingly complex society. The pantheon expands beyond local agricultural deities to include gods of war, justice, wisdom, and craftsmanship, divine specialists who mirror the division of labor developing in cities below. Creation myths emerge that place mortals at the center of cosmic purpose, created by gods to serve their needs through offerings and ritual observance. The concept of divine kingship begins to take shape as successful military leaders claim sacred authority to supplement temporal power. These early rulers present themselves not as tyrants imposing will through force, but as earthly representatives of divine order chosen by gods to maintain justice and prosperity. The institution of monarchy, destined to dominate political organization for millennia, finds its earliest expression in palace complexes that rise alongside ziggurats in Mesopotamian cities. Trade networks extend in every direction from the Mesopotamian heartland, carrying not just goods but ideas over vast distances. Sumerian agricultural techniques spread north into rain-fed regions of Syria and Anatolia. Mesopotamian metalworking influences developments in the Caucasus Mountains and Iranian plateau. The concept of writing itself migrates along trade routes, inspiring parallel developments in Egypt and the Indus Valley that will produce distinct but related literary traditions. Yet for all their innovations, these early Mesopotamians remain recognizably human in their hopes and fears. The literature they create reveals people concerned with the same fundamental questions that perplex every age. Why do good people suffer? What happens after death? How should we treat our neighbors? What do the gods require of mortals? The Epic of Gilgamesh, though not yet in its classic form, begins to take shape as storytellers weave together tales of Uruk's legendary king who seeks immortality but must accept existence's limitations. These early versions express themes that will resonate throughout cultures and millennia: the value of friendship, the inevitability of loss, the search for meaning in a world that often seems arbitrary and cruel. As the 4th millennium BC draws to a close, the transformation is complete. The descendants of nomadic hunters and gatherers have created urban civilization, complete with monumental architecture, complex institutions, sophisticated technologies, and intellectual traditions that will endure for thousands of years. They have learned to live in communities of unprecedented size and complexity, developing systems of law, governance, and social organization that allow tens of thousands of people to coexist peacefully in concentrated settlements. The agricultural surplus that makes this transformation possible also creates new vulnerabilities. Cities become dependent on irrigation systems requiring constant maintenance, vulnerable to droughts and floods that can destroy years of accumulated wealth in weeks. These early cities discover that civilization itself becomes hostage to forces beyond human control. The same specialization that creates wealth also creates interdependence: potters who cannot grow their own food, farmers who cannot make their own tools, priests who depend on others for everything except spiritual guidance. Competition between cities intensifies as populations grow and resources become scarce. What begins as peaceful trade gradually includes military expeditions to secure access to essential materials or capture slaves who can perform the manual labor that urban life requires. Dawn breaks over Sumer's marshlands as Lagash's leader leads his bronze-tipped phalanx toward the disputed border. Behind him march farmers who abandon barley fields to settle once and for all, who controls the life-giving canals separating his domain from rival Umma. The year is 2450 BC. And warfare has become as regular as river flooding, a season of violence that returns inevitably as settlement fights settlement for water, land, and divine favor. This is the early dynastic period, when southern Mesopotamia fragments into a patchwork of competing city-states, each ruled by monarchs claiming divine mandates, while eyeing neighbors' territories with naked ambition. Gone are the days when a single great center like Uruk could dominate the region through trade and cultural influence alone. Now dozens of settlements dot the landscape, their walls bristling with watchtowers and their armies clashing in battles that will echo through eternity. The evolution from priest-ruled communities to warrior kingdoms unfolds gradually but inexorably. In earliest days, the Ensi, literally, Lord of the Plough, governed through religious authority and community consent. These priest-rulers managed irrigation systems, supervised grain distribution, and mediated disputes. But their power remained circumscribed by tradition and citizen assemblies that could withdraw support from leaders failing to serve the common good. Warfare pressures transform everything. As populations grow and arable land becomes scarce, settlements begin raiding neighbors' territories for slaves and livestock. Successful war leaders accumulate followers and wealth that translate into political influence. The title Lugal, big man, emerges for commanders who can protect communities from external threats while leading profitable expeditions against enemy territories. Initially, the Lugal serves only during emergencies, surrendering authority to the Ensi once immediate dangers pass. But as conflict becomes constant rather than occasional, temporary leadership hardens into permanent autocracy. The Lugal builds his own palace complex to rival the traditional religious center, surrounds himself with professional warriors loyal to his person rather than the community, and begins claiming divine sanction for decisions that once required popular approval. Yarnadsha of Lagash exemplifies this transformation. Rising to power around 2550 BC, he presents himself as both successful general and pious servant of deities, commissioning stone reliefs that show him carrying baskets of earth for construction projects while also depicting victories over neighboring settlements. His inscriptions, among history's earliest historical documents, proclaim achievements in war and peace with equal pride. But Yarnadsha's greatest legacy lies in establishing the dynasty that will produce Eannatum, whose campaigns expand Lagash's territory throughout southern Mesopotamia. The famous stele of the vultures, carved to commemorate Eannatum's victory over Umma, reveals both the brutal reality of ancient warfare and the religious ideology that justifies it. On one side, ranks of soldiers march in perfect formation behind their shields, trampling corpses of their enemies while vultures tear at fallen flesh. On the reverse, the god Ningirsa holds a net containing captured prisoners, emphasizing that victory belongs ultimately to divine will rather than mortal strategy. The development of organized formations, tight phalanxes of spearmen protected by large rectangular shields, allows disciplined armies to overwhelm less organized opponents through superior tactics and equipment. Bronze weapons technology gives decisive advantages to city-states that can afford to equip warriors with metal-tipped spears and axes. The composite bow, constructed from wood, horn, and sinew, provides range and penetrating power that overwhelms traditional leather armor. Four-wheeled battle carts drawn by donkeys and carrying a driver plus a warrior armed with javelins serve as mobile command platforms and symbols of authority. Yet for all their innovations, rulers understand that lasting power requires more than battlefield success. Each monarch must also demonstrate divine favor through magnificent construction projects, elaborate religious ceremonies, and generous support for the priesthood that legitimizes autocratic rule. The palace and the ziggurat become partners in governance, secular and sacred authority reinforcing each other while competing for influence over the citizen body. The economic foundation of this political system rests on the institution that made urban civilization possible, the temple economy. By 2500 BC, major religious complexes control vast agricultural estates worked by dependent laborers who receive rations in exchange for service. These sacred lands, theoretically belonging to each settlement's patron deity, provide surplus that supports not only priests and religious personnel, but also craftsmen, merchants, and administrators who keep complex urban societies functioning. Gan Shi, the temple administrator at Gersu, manages an economic empire that would challenge modern corporate executives. His records, preserved on thousands of cuneiform tablets, reveal the staggering complexity of religious operations. Herds of cattle and flocks of sheep numbered in tens of thousands, fields planted with barley and wheat stretching across hundreds of acres, workshops producing textiles and leather goods for both local consumption and long-distance trade. Women play crucial roles in this temple economy, though their activities often remain invisible in records written by male scribes. The Nadita priestesses of Sippar control substantial property and conduct business on their own behalf, while female textile workers constitute the backbone of cloth production that generates much of the region's export wealth. The Entu priestess, highest religious authority in many settlements, wields power that rivals or exceeds that of secular leaders, particularly in matters relating to fertility, agriculture, and annual sacred marriage ceremonies that ensure divine blessing for the community. The pantheon grows increasingly elaborate as urban societies develop more sophisticated governmental and economic institutions. Anu, the sky god, reigns supreme but remains distant from daily affairs. Enlil, lord of wind and storm, serves as executive authority who enforces divine decrees. Enki, master of wisdom and fresh water, provides knowledge that makes civilization possible. Inanna, goddess of love and war, embodies the passions that both create and destroy societies. Each major settlement claims special relationship with particular deities who serve as divine patrons and protectors. Enlil dwells in Nippur, making that center the religious heart of Sumer despite its relatively modest size and limited political power. Enki resides at Eridu, honoring the ancient settlement where urban life began. Inanna rules from Uruk, the great commercial metropolis whose influence extends throughout the known world. These divine associations create religious obligations that transcend political boundaries, as pilgrims from every community journey to attend festivals and make offerings at sanctuaries controlled by their rivals. The standardization of weights and measures facilitates commerce between communities that might be at war politically but remain economically interdependent. Long-distance commerce connects Sumerian settlements to resources and markets extending from the Persian Gulf to Anatolia. Merchants traveling to Dilmun, modern Bahrain, bring back copper and precious stones from the Arabian Peninsula. Expeditions to Magan, Oman, secure supplies of diorite and other hard stones used for sculpture and construction. Trade with Meluhha, the Indus Valley, provides ivory, pearls, and exotic woods that demonstrate wealth and international connections. These commercial networks spread innovations throughout the ancient world while bringing foreign influences into Mesopotamian settlements. The potter's wheel revolutionizes ceramic production across vast regions. Cuneiform writing adapts to record languages from Syria to Iran. Mesopotamian artistic motifs appear on objects found in archaeological sites thousands of miles from their place of origin. The invention of the lunar calendar brings mathematical precision to agricultural and religious observance. Astronomers divide the year into 12 months based on lunar cycles, then add intercalary months to maintain alignment with solar seasons crucial for farming. This calendar system, with its sophisticated understanding of astronomical relationships, influences timekeeping throughout the ancient world and provides the foundation for calendar systems still used today. Mathematical innovation extends far beyond practical computation. Scribes developed the sexagesimal system based on 60 that survives in modern measurements of time and angles. They create multiplication tables, solve quadratic equations, and calculate areas and volumes using geometric principles that anticipate later Greek mathematics. The educational system that produces these mathematical achievements, centered in the Eduba scribal schools, represents humanity's earliest systematic approach to formal education. Students master not only technical skills but also the literary and religious traditions that define cultural identity. They copy and memorize epic poems, hymns, and wisdom literature that preserve the community's understanding of proper behavior and cosmic order. The legal system that emerges from these educational institutions reflects sophisticated understanding of justice and social order. Although no complete law code survives from this period, thousands of legal documents reveal courts that handle everything from property disputes to criminal cases. Judges weigh testimony, examine evidence, and render verdicts based on established precedents rather than arbitrary personal preference. The rise of professional warrior classes transforms both warfare and society. No longer can every citizen farmer be expected to defend his community with agricultural tools converted to weapons. Successful armies require soldiers who train constantly, fight in disciplined formations, and remain loyal to commanders rather than local communities. These professionals must be equipped, fed, and housed by the larger society, creating new economic burdens that require either increased taxation or successful campaigns that pay for themselves through plunder and tribute. By 2400 BC, the system of competing city-states has achieved remarkable stability despite constant conflict. No single power has proven capable of conquering and holding all the others, creating a balance that allows each community to maintain independence while participating in the larger cultural sphere. Trade continues even between enemies. Religious festivals draw pilgrims from hostile territories, and cultural innovations spread rapidly throughout the region. Yet this very success contains the seeds of transformation. The wealth generated by urban civilization, the technologies developed through constant conflict, and the administrative systems created to manage complex societies provide the tools that ambitious rulers will soon use to transcend the limitations of the fragmented system. Lugalzagc of Umma stands ready to attempt what no ruler has achieved before: the unification of all Sumer under a single crown. His success will demonstrate that the fragmented system has become obsolete, while his ultimate failure will reveal that traditional independence faces threats more dangerous than intercity conflict. The old world trembles on the edge of transformation. New powers rise in the north, where Semitic peoples learn urban techniques while developing innovations of their own. The future belongs to empires rather than independent city-states, to professional armies rather than citizen militias, to rulers who claim universal dominion rather than local authority. But for now, in this golden afternoon of Sumerian civilization, the ancient settlements maintain their proud independence. Their walls stand strong, their deities receive proper honor, and their people prosper under the protection of leaders who balance ambition with tradition. The greatest achievements of the world's earliest urban culture lie ahead, awaiting the challenges that will either destroy or transform everything that has been built in the land between the rivers. The bronze-tipped spear pierces morning air as Lugalzagc of Umma surveys the battlefield where his enemies lie scattered like broken reeds after a storm. Blood darkens the earth around Lagash's walls, and smoke rises from burning granaries that once fed his rivals' armies. The year is 2340 BC, and for the first time since the gods scattered kingship among the cities, one man stands poised to unite all Sumer under a single crown. Behind him, warriors from a dozen conquered settlements kneel in homage to the ruler who has achieved what seemed impossible. Uruk has surrendered its ancient independence. The great city, first among equals, acknowledges his supremacy. Even proud Nippur, Sumer's sacred heart, opens its gates to the conqueror who claims dominion over 50 territories stretching from the Persian Gulf to the Syrian hills. Yet Lugalzagc's triumph carries within it the seeds of its own destruction. In the northern city of Kish, a young Semitic official named Sharakin, the king is legitimate, watches these southern victories with calculating eyes. Soon the world will know him by the name Sargon, and his revolution will transform not merely Mesopotamia's territorial map, but the very nature of royal power itself. Lugalzagc's rise represents the logical culmination of centuries of intercity warfare that has gradually eliminated smaller players while concentrating force and economic resources in increasingly powerful rulers' hands. Unlike previous conquerors who sought tribute or temporary dominance, the Lord of Umma pursues systematic annexation that dissolves traditional boundaries between victors and vanquished. His methods reveal sophisticated understanding of both battlefield strategy and governmental psychology. Rather than simply destroying defeated enemies, Lugalzhc incorporates their armies into his own forces, their administrators into his bureaucracy, their gods into his religious ceremonies. The result is not conquest but transformation, the creation of something approaching a unified state that transcends the city-state system that has defined civilization since its beginning. The royal inscription commemorating his achievements reads like a manifesto for territorial ambition. When Enlil, king of all lands, granted to Lugalzhc the kingship of the nation, made all lands bow down before him from the sunrise to the sunset, then he made straight his path from the lower sea along the Tigris and Euphrates to the upper sea. This grandiose language masks practical innovations that make unprecedented territorial control possible. Lugalzhc's administration relies on professional bureaucrats rather than local nobles, standardized legal codes rather than traditional customs, centralized resource allocation rather than autonomous city-state economies. For the first time, merchants can travel from the Persian Gulf to Anatolia under protection of a single sovereign who guarantees safe passage and uniform commercial regulations. Yet the very scope of these achievements creates vulnerabilities that more traditional rulers avoid. The logistics of controlling territory stretching across hundreds of miles strain administrative capabilities that evolved to manage single urban centers. Communication delays mean that provincial unrest can spread unchecked while central authorities remain ignorant of developing crises. Most dangerously, expansion brings contact with peoples who possess warfare technologies and organizational methods that challenge conventional assumptions about military supremacy. Among these potential threats, none appears more innocuous than the Semitic populations scattered throughout northern Mesopotamia and Syria. Unlike urbanized southerners, these groups maintain semi-nomadic lifestyles that emphasize mobility and tribal loyalty over territorial control and institutional authority. Their languages belong to a different family entirely. Their religious practices focus on different deities, and their social organization operates according to principles that seem primitive compared to southern cities' sophisticated bureaucracies. Yet appearances deceive. These northern peoples have spent centuries observing Sumerian innovations while adapting them to their own cultural contexts. They understand cuneiform writing, bronze metallurgy, and agricultural techniques, but they have also preserved warfare traditions that urbanized populations have largely abandoned. Their armies combine civilized warfare's discipline and equipment with the mobility and tactical flexibility that only pastoral societies can maintain. Sargon embodies this cultural synthesis perfectly. Born to Semitic parents in a region where northern dialects predominate, he nevertheless receives a thoroughly Mesopotamian education that includes literacy in southern script, familiarity with urban administration, and training in religious and legal traditions that legitimize royal authority throughout the region. His name suggests adoption into established society, possibly as a foundling rescued from the river in circumstances that later legends will elaborate into mythological narratives of divine protection and destined greatness. The historical figure emerges into recorded history as an official in Yarzababa's court at Kish, where his responsibilities include oversight of trade networks connecting northern and southern Mesopotamia. This position provides intimate knowledge of both southern wealth and southern vulnerabilities, the economic systems that generate urban prosperity, the military formations that protect it, and the divisions that prevent effective coordination among potential defenders. When Lugalzhc's expansion threatens Kish's independence, Sargon recognizes an opportunity that his more conventional superiors cannot imagine. Rather than accepting subordination to southern leadership or attempting feudal resistance with inadequate resources, he proposes a radical alternative: the creation of a new kind of empire that harnesses northern peoples' warfare potential while incorporating established civilization's administrative sophistication. The coup that brings the young commander to power in Kish unfolds with lightning speed that suggests months of careful preparation. Yarzababa disappears from historical records, presumably eliminated by conspirators who understand that half measures invite retaliation. Within weeks, northern forces are marching south under banners that proclaim not merely territorial conquest but civilizational transformation. The armies that this new leader commands differ fundamentally from anything Lugalzhc has previously encountered. Instead of citizen militias called up for seasonal campaigns, These are professional soldiers who campaign year-round and maintain loyalty to commanders rather than home cities. Instead of traditional phalanx formations that rely on coordinated movement by heavily armored spearmen, Northern tactics emphasize flexibility and rapid maneuver by lighter troops capable of adapting to unexpected circumstances. Most importantly, these forces include substantial numbers of archers equipped with composite bows, a technological innovation that provides range and penetrating power far superior to simple wooden bows used by most southern armies. These weapons, requiring specialized training to use effectively, give northern forces decisive advantages in open field engagements where traditional close combat tactics prove inadequate. The confrontation between these contrasting systems occurs somewhere in central Mesopotamia, probably near the ancient boundary between southern and northern cultural spheres. Details of the battle itself vanish into historical obscurity, but the outcome transforms the entire region's territorial map. Lugalzag's empire, constructed through decades of careful conquest, disintegrates in a single afternoon as news of his defeat spreads faster than his fleeing armies. Sargon's victory proves to be only the beginning of a career that will extend northern dominion far beyond anything Lugalzag imagined possible. The new emperor possesses not merely superior tactical methods but also strategic vision that encompasses geographical and cultural horizons that dwarf those of traditional Mesopotamian rulers. Within 5 years of his initial triumph, Akkadian forces reached the Mediterranean Sea, establishing tributary relationships with cities whose names appear in cuneiform records for the first time. Expeditions into Anatolia secure access to silver mines and timber resources that Mesopotamian civilization has always required but never directly controlled. Campaigns into the Zagros Mountains established dominion over trade routes connecting Mesopotamia to the Iranian plateau and Central Asian networks beyond. The speed and scope of these conquests reflect not merely tactical superiority but also the attraction that northern rule holds for populations who have suffered under traditional methods. Unlike previous conquerors who extracted tribute while leaving local power structures intact, Sargon offers incorporation into a larger system that provides opportunities for advancement, protection from external threats, and access to commercial networks spanning the known world. This policy of inclusive expansion proves particularly appealing to merchant classes throughout the region, who discover that unified rule facilitates trade on a previously impossible scale. Standardized weights and measures eliminate confusion that hampers commercial transactions between different regions. Common legal codes reduce risks associated with long-distance commerce. Most importantly, centralized protection extends to trade routes that individual cities could never secure independently. The administrative system that makes this vast empire manageable represents perhaps Sargon's most significant innovation. Rather than attempting to govern directly from his capital, he creates a network of provincial administrators who possess delegated authority to handle local affairs while remaining accountable to central oversight. These officials, drawn from both northern and local populations, receive training in bureaucratic methods while maintaining familiarity with regional customs and languages. The cultural consequences of this policy prove even more significant than immediate political benefits. For the first time, the Near East's diverse populations begin participating in a common culture that transcends traditional ethnic and linguistic boundaries. Northern dialects become the language of international diplomacy and commercial correspondence, while Southern script retains its role as the sacred language of religious and scholarly literature. This bilingual literary culture produces innovations that neither tradition could achieve independently. Northern poets adapt Southern mythological themes to express their own cultural values, while traditional scribes incorporate Northern vocabulary and grammatical structures that expand their ancient language's expressive possibilities. The result is a literary renaissance that produces some of the finest works in both traditions. Yet, even as achievements reach their zenith, structural problems emerge that will ultimately prove fatal to Northern dominance. The very scope of territorial control creates administrative burdens that strain ancient governmental systems' capabilities. Provincial rebellions become increasingly frequent as local populations discover that imperial benefits cannot compensate for traditional autonomy's loss. Most ominously, The tactical advantages that originally enabled conquest gradually diffused to potential enemies who adapt innovations while retaining their own traditions. Sargon's grandson Naram-Sin illustrates both the possibilities and dangers inherent in power carried to its logical extreme. Unlike his predecessors, who maintained the fiction of ruling through divine appointment, Naram-Sin declares himself an actual god, demanding worship alongside traditional deities and constructing temples dedicated to his own cult. This deification represents the culmination of an ideology that gradually transforms successful rulers into divine beings whose authority transcends traditional limitations. Naram-Sin's inscriptions describe campaigns conducted not merely for territorial gain or commercial advantage, but for cosmic purposes involving the fundamental structure of universal order. Yet these grandiose claims prove impossible to sustain when faced with defeats that reveal supposedly divine rulers' mortal limitations. The invasion of the Gutian mountain peoples from the Zagros, whose methods prove superior to established forces, destroys the illusion of invincibility while demonstrating that even gods can die when pierced by enemy spears. The collapse unfolds with the same dramatic speed that characterized its creation. Within a generation of Naram-Sin's death, central authority disintegrates as provincial governors declare independence. Tributary relationships dissolve, and trade networks fragment into competing spheres of influence. The Gutians establish dominance over much of Mesopotamia, though their rule proves even more unstable than the system they destroyed. Yet the destruction of Akkadian power does not eliminate the cultural and technological innovations that expansion has spread throughout the Near East. Cuneiform writing continues serving as the medium for international correspondence long after the scribes who developed its diplomatic applications have vanished into historical obscurity. Artistic motifs and architectural techniques pioneered during this period influenced construction projects in regions that never directly experienced northern rule. Most significantly, the concept of universal empire survives the collapse of its first successful embodiment, inspiring future rulers who dream of recreating these achievements while avoiding the mistakes that led to destruction. The memory of unified rule becomes an ideal that will motivate conquerors throughout subsequent history. For the Sumerians themselves, this period represents both catastrophe and opportunity. The destruction of their independence eliminates the city-state system that has defined their civilization since its origins. Yet northern patronage also supports cultural achievements that surpassed anything accomplished during the period of fragmentation. The synthesis of southern learning with northern innovation produces intellectual and artistic works that represent the highest expression of Mesopotamian civilization. In the shadow of Uar's ancient ziggurat, Uar-Nammu kneels before the moon god Nana as dawn breaks over a world transformed by chaos. The year is 2112 BC, and the proud descendant of fishermen and date farmers prepares to accept a crown that will restore glory to a civilization that seemed destined for extinction. Around him, the remnants of Sumer's greatest cities lie scarred by decades of barbarian occupation, their temples desecrated, their libraries scattered, their people reduced to servitude under foreign masters who speak harsh mountain dialects and worship alien gods. Yet today marks the beginning of resurrection. The Gutian warlords who carved up the Akkadian Empire's corpse have grown complacent in their stolen palaces, their tribal feuds creating opportunities that patient observers have been waiting generations to exploit. Uar-Nammu has spent 20 years building alliances among the South's scattered nobility, learning the lessons of previous failures while preparing for the moment when united action might restore independence to the land between the rivers. The Gutian collapse unfolds with startling swiftness once the first blow falls. These mountain warriors, formidable in conquest, prove incapable of governing the complex urban societies they have dominated through fear alone. Their kings squabble over tribute rights while their followers drift back to highland strongholds, leaving administrative chaos in territories that require constant attention to irrigation systems, trade networks, and religious observances that maintain social order. Uar-Nammu strikes when Gutian attention focuses on internecine warfare in the northern territories. His forces disciplined veterans trained in traditional formations but equipped with innovations learned during the occupation sweep through the southern cities like floodwater breaking through weakened dikes. Within 6 months, the banners of UR fly over settlements that have not known native rule for nearly a century. Yet military victory represents only the beginning of challenges that will determine whether this restoration proves permanent or merely another cycle in the endless alternation between order and chaos that has characterized Mesopotamian history. Ur-Nammu understands that lasting success requires more than battlefield triumph. It demands the reconstruction of institutions, traditions, and cultural achievements that foreign occupation has damaged or destroyed. The new monarch's first priority involves restoring the irrigation systems that make urban civilization possible. Decades of neglect under barbarian rule have allowed canals to silt up, dikes to crumble, and regulatory mechanisms to fall into disrepair. Without immediate attention to hydraulic infrastructure, even the most brilliant cultural renaissance will collapse when the next drought reduces agricultural productivity below subsistence levels. The massive public works projects that Ur-Nammu initiates dwarf anything attempted by previous rulers in their scope and sophistication. Teams of engineers survey hundreds of miles of waterways, calculating optimal gradients and designing distribution systems that will serve both agricultural and urban needs. Thousands of laborers, volunteers, conscripts, and purchased captives dig new channels while repairing ancient ones according to specifications that reflect centuries of accumulated hydraulic knowledge. These construction projects serve multiple purposes beyond their immediate practical benefits. They provide employment for populations displaced by years of warfare and occupation, creating economic stability that allows normal social relationships to resume. They demonstrate royal commitment to public welfare rather than merely personal aggrandizement, building popular support for the restored dynasty. Most importantly, they establish visible symbols of renewed prosperity that attract merchants, craftsmen, and scholars from throughout the region. The legal reforms that accompany physical reconstruction prove even more significant for long-term stability. Ur-Nammu's law code, carved in stone and displayed in public spaces throughout his kingdom, represents humanity's earliest systematic attempt to establish justice through written statutes rather than arbitrary royal decree. Unlike the crude vengeance systems practiced by barbarian occupiers, these laws distinguish between different categories of offenses while prescribing punishments that reflect both the severity of crimes and the social status of those involved. The code's preamble reveals sophisticated understanding of the relationship between legal order and divine approval. After Anu and Enlil had turned over the kingship of Ur to Nana, at that time I, Ur-Nammu, son of Ninsun, for my beloved mother who bore me, in accordance with his true word, did build the temple of Enlil in Nippur. I built the wall of Ur. I restored the ways of the land in equity. This language emphasizes that royal lawgiving serves cosmic purposes rather than merely human convenience. By establishing justice according to divine principles, the monarch ensures that earthly society reflects heavenly order, creating stability that transcends the limitations of individual rulers or particular historical circumstances. The specific provisions reveal remarkable sophistication in their treatment of economic relationships, family obligations, and social hierarchy. Commercial regulations protect both merchants and customers from fraud while establishing standardized procedures for conducting business transactions. Marriage and inheritance laws balance individual rights against family interests while providing mechanisms for resolving disputes that might otherwise fragment communities. Perhaps most remarkably, the code establishes monetary compensation rather than physical retribution as the preferred remedy for most offenses. Unlike the eye for an eye principle that will characterize later legal systems, Ur-Nammu's statutes emphasize restoration over revenge, recognizing that community welfare benefits more from restitution than from additional violence that merely perpetuates cycles of conflict. The administrative system that implements these legal reforms represents perhaps Ur-Nammu's most enduring innovation. Rather than relying on traditional noble families whose loyalty may prove unreliable, the restored monarchy creates a professional bureaucracy recruited through examination systems that test competence rather than inherited status. These officials receive training in law, mathematics, record-keeping, and religious observance that prepares them for responsibilities spanning both secular and sacred domains. The educational institutions that produced this administrative elite undergo complete reconstruction during the early years of restoration. Scribal schools that survived barbarian occupation as underground institutions emerged to establish curricula that combined traditional learning with practical skills needed for governing complex societies. Students master not only classical texts preserving ancient wisdom, but also contemporary techniques for surveying land, calculating taxes, managing warehouses, and conducting diplomatic correspondence. This educational renaissance produces literary and scholarly achievements that surpass even the greatest accomplishments of earlier periods. Scribes working in palace and temple scriptoriums collect, edit, and preserve texts that might otherwise vanish into historical obscurity. Their efforts create standardized versions of ancient myths, hymns, and epic poems that establish canonical forms for literary works that will influence writing throughout the ancient world. The Epic of Gilgamesh receives its classic formulation during this period as editors weave together various regional traditions into a unified narrative exploring universal themes through distinctly Mesopotamian cultural perspectives. Similarly, creation myths, flood stories, and divine genealogies achieve the forms in which they will be transmitted to later civilizations, carrying forward theological and philosophical insights representing the mature expression of humanity's earliest systematic religious thinking. The architectural projects symbolizing this cultural flowering surpass previous achievements in both scale and sophistication. Uarnama's ziggurat at Ur, rising over 60 meters above the surrounding plain, becomes the largest religious structure yet constructed in Mesopotamia. Its staged terraces, connected by ceremonial staircases and decorated with elaborate architectural ornamentation, create a visual symbol of restored glory visible for miles across the delta landscape. Construction of this massive monument requires organizational capabilities demonstrating the administrative sophistication of the restored state. Engineers coordinate the work of thousands of laborers while managing supply chains bringing materials from quarries hundreds of miles away. Architects design structural systems capable of supporting enormous weight, while creating interior spaces suitable for religious ceremonies involving hundreds of participants. The economic foundation supporting these cultural achievements rests on commercial innovations surpassing anything attempted by previous governments. UR3 administrators create the world's first systematic approach to state-controlled economic planning, with central authorities coordinating production, distribution, and consumption across the entire kingdom. This system, revealed through tens of thousands of cuneiform tablets discovered in palace and temple archives, demonstrates organizational complexity rivaling modern corporate structures in scope and sophistication. The famous redistribution center at Drahem illustrates the scale and efficiency of this planned economy. Located strategically between major cities, this facility receives livestock tribute from throughout the kingdom, processes animals for ritual sacrifice and secular consumption, and distributes meat products according to carefully calculated schedules ensuring adequate supplies for religious festivals, royal ceremonies, and administrative personnel. Records show that Drahem handles hundreds of thousands of cattle, sheep, and goats annually, requiring logistical coordination involving transportation, storage, processing, and distribution operations spanning the entire agricultural calendar. Similar centralized management extends to other economic sectors: textile production, metalworking, pottery manufacture, and agricultural processing operate according to state plans that allocate resources, assign quotas, and distribute finished products based on governmental priorities rather than market mechanisms. This system eliminates the inefficiencies and inequalities characterizing purely commercial economies while ensuring that essential goods remain available even during periods of environmental stress or external threat. Yet the very success of this planned economy creates vulnerabilities that will ultimately contribute to the dynasty's collapse. The administrative burden of managing such complex systems strains governmental capabilities, particularly when external pressures reduce available resources or disrupt transportation networks. The reign of Uarnama's son Shulgi illustrates both the possibilities and limitations inherent in this approach to governance. Ascending the throne in 2094 BC, Shulgi inherits a kingdom that has achieved remarkable stability and prosperity under his father's reforms. His 48-year reign witnesses the culmination of cultural and economic achievements defining the UR3 Renaissance, yet it also reveals structural problems that will prove impossible to resolve within existing institutional frameworks. Shulgi's early years focus on consolidating and extending his father's innovations rather than introducing fundamental changes to governmental systems that appear to function effectively. He completes major construction projects begun during the previous reign while initiating new ones demonstrating royal commitment to public welfare and divine service. His road-building programs create the first systematic transportation network in history, with maintained highways connecting major cities and way stations providing security and supply services for official travelers. These infrastructure improvements facilitate commercial growth exceeding all previous achievements. Merchants can travel safely between distant markets while carrying larger quantities of goods than ever before possible. Standardized weights, measures, and currency systems eliminate confusion that hampered earlier trade relationships. Most importantly, royal protection extends to commercial activities across the entire kingdom, reducing risks that traditionally required substantial profit margins to justify long-distance ventures. The cultural achievements of Shulgi's middle years represent the pinnacle of literary and artistic accomplishment. Palace schools produce scholars whose mathematical, astronomical, and linguistic expertise surpasses anything achieved by previous civilizations. The king himself receives literary education, enabling him to compose hymns and poems whose technical sophistication demonstrates the high level of cultural refinement characterizing the court. Yet the later years of Shulgi's reign reveal growing problems that administrative efficiency cannot resolve. Climate change reduces agricultural productivity throughout the region, straining resource allocation systems depending on predictable surpluses. Population growth outpaces economic expansion, creating social tensions challenging traditional mechanisms for maintaining order. Most ominously, external pressures increase as nomadic peoples displaced by environmental changes begin migrating toward Mesopotamian territories, offering greater security and prosperity. The Amorite invasions that eventually destroy the UR3 state begin as gradual infiltration rather than dramatic conquest. These Semitic nomads, driven from traditional grazing areas by drought and competing tribal pressures, initially seek employment as mercenaries, laborers, and trading partners rather than territorial control. Their assimilation into existing social structures proceeds peacefully enough that royal administrators view them as assets rather than threats. Yet demographic change gradually alters the kingdom's ethnic and cultural composition in ways undermining traditional institutions. Amorite settlers bring different languages, religious practices, and social customs, challenging the homogeneity essential for centralized administration. Their tribal loyalties compete with royal allegiance, creating alternative centers of authority that fragment the unified command structure on which the planned economy depends. The death of Shulgi in 2047 BC marks the beginning of accelerated decline as his successors prove incapable of adapting governmental systems to changing circumstances. Amarsin and Shusin attempt to maintain traditional policies despite clear evidence that external conditions require fundamental innovations. Their rigid adherence to established procedures reflects both conservative institutional culture and genuine uncertainty about alternatives that might preserve essential achievements while adapting to new realities. The final collapse comes with devastating swiftness during the reign of Ibisin as multiple crises converge to overwhelm administrative capabilities that have functioned effectively for over a century. Amorite pressure intensifies beyond the kingdom's capacity to absorb or resist, while Elamite invasions from the east exploit internal divisions that foreign occupation has created. Environmental degradation compounds these political challenges as soil salinization reduces agricultural productivity in core territories that must support both traditional populations and recent immigrants. The fall of UR in 2004 BC represents more than mere political transition. It marks the end of the last period of native rule that Sumer will ever experience. The lament literature commemorating this catastrophe expresses grief transcending immediate political concerns to encompass the destruction of cultural achievements that will never be fully restored. The lament for UR captures the magnitude of loss and language resonating across millennia. O my city attacked without cause, O my city attacked and destroyed! "Oh, my city that exists no more! The day that came to be for my city, that day of storm destructive of all things, that day that came to be for me, that day when my city was destroyed." Yet, even as political independence vanishes forever, the cultural legacy of the UR3 Renaissance ensures that essential elements of Sumerian civilization will survive under foreign rule. The legal codes, literary works, architectural techniques, and administrative methods developed during this final flowering influence subsequent developments throughout Mesopotamia and beyond. Future empires will adopt and adapt these innovations while lacking the cultural context that gave them original meaning and power. The educational systems that produced the Renaissance's intellectual achievements continue functioning under new rulers who recognize their practical value despite their foreign cultural associations. Scribal schools preserve and transmit textual traditions, maintaining continuity with the past while gradually adapting to contemporary needs. This cultural persistence ensures that the wisdom accumulated over 3 millennia of urban civilization will continue shaping human development long after the political structures that created it have vanished into historical memory. Standing in the ruins of Ur's great ziggurat as enemy soldiers systematically loot its treasures, the last priests of Nana perform final rituals they know will never be repeated. Their prayers acknowledge defeat while also expressing faith that the gods will eventually restore justice to a world temporarily dominated by chaos and barbarism. They cannot know that their civilization's greatest achievements will outlive every empire, that the ideas and institutions they have created will influence human development until the end of recorded history. The acrid smoke of burning archives drifts across Ur's sacred precinct as Kendatu the Elamite surveys his latest conquest. Clay tablets preserving 3,000 years of accumulated wisdom crackle in flames, cuneiform signs dissolving into ash that desert winds scatter like memories of a dream. The year is 2004 BC, and the last king of the Third Dynasty lies dead in his palace, his dreams of restoration extinguished along with the independence of the people who gave civilization to the world. Yet even as foreign boots trample courtyards where Yarnama once proclaimed his law code, the seeds of transformation are already sprouting in territories that seem too remote to matter. Along the Middle Euphrates, in towns whose names mean nothing to Elamite conquerors, Amorite chieftains are learning to govern settled populations rather than merely raid them. These desert nomads, dismissed as barbarians by the sophisticated administrators of fallen Ur, carry within their tribal memories the organizational skills and adaptive intelligence that will reshape civilization according to new patterns. The collapse of native rule unfolds through environmental catastrophe as much as foreign invasion. The irrigation systems that transformed southern Mesopotamia into the world's first urban heartland have been poisoning themselves for generations through processes that even the most skilled engineers cannot reverse. Millennia of intensive agriculture have raised salt levels in previously fertile soils until barley yields drop below subsistence requirements despite normal rainfall and careful cultivation. Families that have worked the same plots for 20 generations abandon settlements their great-grandfathers founded, joining streams of environmental refugees seeking sustenance in territories already strained by population pressure and resource scarcity. These internal migrations create social tensions that existing governmental structures prove incapable of managing. The centralized administrative system that functioned efficiently during periods of stable productivity breaks down when faced with demographic chaos requiring rapid adaptation to changing circumstances. The Amorite infiltration that earlier generations absorbed without serious disruption accelerates into mass migration as environmental degradation in Syria and the Arabian Peninsula forces entire tribal confederations to seek new territories. Unlike previous nomadic incursions involving relatively small groups seeking temporary grazing rights, this movement includes whole peoples who intend permanent settlement in regions offering better prospects for survival and prosperity. Many Amorite groups arrive not as invaders but as allies, mercenaries, and trading partners whose services existing rulers desperately need. Their mobility and military skills prove invaluable for defending settled territories against other nomadic groups, while their commercial networks provide access to resources that traditional supply systems can no longer guarantee. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, society's ethnic composition shifts until Amorite names appear regularly in administrative records, religious personnel lists, and commercial documents. These newcomers adapt to urban life with remarkable speed, learning cuneiform writing, adopting local religious practices, and intermarrying with established families in ways creating hybrid traditions combining nomadic and sedentary elements. Yet adaptation flows in both directions as settled populations discover that Amorite social organization offers advantages that traditional institutions cannot provide. Tribal kinship networks prove more flexible than bureaucratic hierarchies when dealing with unprecedented challenges. Oral legal traditions adapt more readily to changing circumstances than written codes reflecting historical conditions rather than contemporary needs. Most importantly, nomadic leadership methods prove more effective at coordinating diverse groups than administrative systems designed for homogeneous populations. The rise of Babylon exemplifies this synthesis at its most successful. Founded as a minor settlement on the Euphrates sometime during the UR3 period, the town achieves prominence only when Amorite rulers recognize its strategic potential as a center for controlling trade routes between northern and southern regions. Under Sumerian, the first of the Amorite dynasty that will dominate the region for 3 centuries, Babylon begins its transformation from provincial outpost to imperial capital. The early Babylonian kings pursued territorial expansion through methods combining traditional administrative techniques with nomadic military innovations. Their armies include both disciplined infantry formations inherited from earlier periods and mobile cavalry units reflecting pastoral military traditions. Their governments employed both written law codes and oral customary practices, both centralized bureaucracies and decentralized tribal authorities. This hybrid approach proves remarkably effective at managing the ethnic and religious diversity characterizing the post-city-state era. Rather than attempting to impose uniform standards on diverse populations, Babylonian administration accommodates local variations while maintaining overall coordination through flexible institutional arrangements. The result is a political system achieving stability through adaptation rather than rigid control. The legal achievements crowning this synthesis receive their classic expression in the Code of Hammurabi, promulgated around 1750 BC after nearly 2 centuries of institutional experimentation. This comprehensive law code represents the culmination of legal development, incorporating ancient precedents, Akkadian innovations, and Amorite customary practices into a unified system addressing the practical needs of a multi-ethnic society. The code's prologue reveals sophisticated understanding of the relationship between law and social order. When Marduk commanded me to provide just ways for the people of the land and to make them have good governance, I set forth truth and justice throughout the land and promoted the welfare of the people. The specific provisions demonstrate remarkable attention to commercial relationships, family obligations, property rights, and criminal justice reflecting centuries of legal evolution. Commercial regulations protect both merchants and customers while establishing procedures for resolving disputes arising from long-distance trade involving multiple legal jurisdictions. Family law balances individual rights against kinship obligations while providing mechanisms for adapting to changing social circumstances. Perhaps most significantly, the code establishes graduated punishments reflecting both the severity of offenses and the social status of those involved, creating a legal hierarchy mirroring the complex social stratification of Babylonian society. Unlike earlier systems applying uniform penalties regardless of social context, Hammurabi's code recognizes that effective justice must account for the different roles and responsibilities characterizing hierarchical societies. These legal innovations influence judicial systems throughout the ancient world, providing models for later law codes governing Greek city-states, Roman territories, and medieval European kingdoms. The principle that written law should reflect moral principles rather than merely royal preferences becomes a foundation for legal thinking persisting until the present day. Yet even as Babylonian civilization achieves its greatest institutional successes, the underlying demographic and environmental trends that destroyed Sumerian independence continue operating with inexorable logic. The agricultural foundation of prosperity proves incapable of supporting the population densities that urban civilization requires without creating ecological damage that ultimately undermines the entire system. Archaeological evidence reveals the scale of environmental degradation accompanying the transition from Sumerian to Babylonian hegemony. Settlement patterns shift northward as southern territories become increasingly difficult to cultivate despite massive investments in irrigation technology and soil restoration projects. Urban populations decline dramatically in traditionally prosperous regions while new centers emerge in areas offering better agricultural prospects. These environmental challenges intersect with continuing nomadic pressures to create security problems, straining the military and administrative capabilities of settled governments. The Kassite invasions that begin during Hammurabi's later years represent a new phase of nomadic expansion involving peoples whose military technologies and organizational methods surpass those of previous tribal confederations. Unlike earlier nomadic groups that sought incorporation into existing societies, the Kassites pursue territorial conquest aimed at replacing established governments, with tribal authorities responsible primarily to kinship groups rather than territorial populations. Their success depends partly on military innovations, particularly horse-drawn chariots providing mobility and striking power unprecedented in regional warfare, but also on political organization proving more adaptable than traditional bureaucratic structures. The gradual Kassite conquest of Babylonia unfolds over several generations through processes combining military pressure with peaceful infiltration, diplomatic negotiation with economic penetration. Rather than destroying existing institutions, Kassite rulers adapt administrative methods to serve tribal objectives while preserving enough continuity to maintain legitimacy among settled populations. This pattern of nomadic conquest followed by institutional adaptation becomes the standard model for political change throughout later history. Each successive wave of invaders, Kassites, Assyrians, Chaldeans, Persians, initially threatens to destroy existing civilization but ultimately adopts and modifies inherited institutions rather than creating entirely new ones. The linguistic consequences of these repeated conquests gradually transform the intellectual identity of Mesopotamian civilization. Sumerian disappears as a spoken language sometime during the early second millennium, surviving only as the sacred script of religious and scholarly literature. Akkadian evolves through contact with successive waves of Semitic and Indo-European languages until it becomes increasingly distant from its classical forms. New languages, Aramaic, Persian, Greek, eventually replace older ones as the media of daily communication and commercial correspondence. Yet intellectual persistence proves stronger than political continuity, as traditions established during the Sumerian period continue influencing human development long after their original social contexts have vanished. The Epic of Gilgamesh survives in Akkadian, Hittite, and other translations carrying its themes of friendship, mortality, and meaning to societies having no direct connection with ancient Mesopotamian urban civilization. Mathematical and astronomical knowledge developed in Sumerian schools provides the foundation for scientific traditions that will eventually influence Greek, Islamic, and European scholars. The sexagesimal number system, dividing hours into 60 minutes and circles into 360 degrees, preserves mathematical insights in contemporary measurement systems that users employ without awareness of their ancient origins. Legal principles established in early law codes and refined in Babylonian legislation influence jurisprudence throughout the ancient world and beyond. The concept that law should reflect moral principles rather than merely royal convenience, that justice requires consistent application of established standards rather than arbitrary personal decisions, that punishment should fit crimes rather than simply demonstrate power. These ideas originate in Mesopotamian legal thinking and spread throughout subsequent legal traditions. Religious concepts developed in Sumerian theology continue shaping human understanding of divine-human relationships long after the gods of Mesopotamia have been forgotten by all but scholars. The idea that cosmic order requires moral behavior, that earthly events reflect heavenly justice, that human beings bear responsibility for maintaining harmony between divine and mundane realms, these theological insights appear in modified forms throughout later religious traditions. Most profoundly, the urban civilization that the Sumerians created becomes the dominant model for human social organization. Despite the environmental and demographic challenges that destroyed its original manifestation, the concept that large populations can live together peacefully through institutional coordination, that specialized occupations can create prosperity through cooperative exchange, that intellectual achievements can transcend individual lifespans through deliberate preservation and transmission. These civilizational insights survive every political catastrophe and continue guiding human development into the contemporary era. The memory of Sumerian achievement persists in mythological and literary traditions, celebrating the wisdom and prosperity of early times while acknowledging that such achievements remain vulnerable to forces beyond human control. The biblical account of the Tower of Babel, with its themes of technological ambition and divine judgment, reflects folk memories of ziggurat construction and urban civilization that seem to challenge the natural order itself. Similarly, flood narratives appearing in diverse traditions preserve memories of environmental catastrophes that periodically devastated ancient societies while also expressing faith that human ingenuity and divine mercy can ensure survival even when faced with seemingly insurmountable challenges. These stories carry forward practical wisdom about adaptation and resilience that remains relevant for contemporary societies facing their own environmental and demographic pressures. In the dusty archive chambers beneath Ashurbanipal's palace at Nineveh, scribes labor by lamplight to preserve treasures more precious than gold or lapis lazuli. The year is 650 BC, and the last great Assyrian king has commanded his scholars to gather the wisdom of ages from every corner of his empire. Clay tablets bearing cuneiform signs flow into the royal library like tributaries feeding a mighty river. Epic poems from Babylon, astronomical observations from Uruk, mathematical treatises from Sippar, medical texts from Uar. Among these countless documents lie the literary masterpieces that vanished Sumerians created 2 millennia earlier in the marshlands where civilization first took root. The Epic of Gilgamesh, the descent of Inanna, the creation myths explaining how gods shaped the world from primordial chaos, all preserved in careful copies that will carry forward the spiritual and intellectual achievements of humanity's earliest urban society long after the last person who could speak their language has returned to dust. The Assyrian scribes cataloging these texts cannot know they are creating the world's first great library, an institution inspiring similar projects from Alexandria to Baghdad, from medieval monasteries to modern universities. They only understand that their sovereign has commanded them to gather all knowledge, and they obey with the thoroughness that has made Assyrian administration the most efficient the world has yet seen. When Nineveh falls to Babylonian and Median forces in 612 BC, the flames consuming Ashurbanipal's palace bake the clay tablets in his library to ceramic hardness, inadvertently ensuring their survival for modern archaeologists who will rediscover them 25 centuries later. In this accidental preservation lies a perfect symbol of how ideas outlive the civilizations that create them, finding new life in contexts their original authors could never have imagined. The cuneiform writing system making this preservation possible represents perhaps the most enduring innovation emerging from the Mesopotamian experiment in settled living. From its humble origins as an accounting method for temple granaries, the wedge-shaped script evolves into a flexible medium capable of recording everything from royal correspondence to love poetry, from mathematical calculations to philosophical speculation. Standing in museum galleries where artifacts testify to achievements that seemed lost forever, contemporary observers can appreciate both the fragility and durability of cultural achievement. The physical objects that survive, sculptures, tablets, jewelry, tools, represent only a tiny fraction of what these ancient people created. Yet they suffice to reveal the scope and sophistication of humanity's first great civilizational experiment. More importantly, the ideas and institutions that the earliest Mesopotamians pioneered continue shaping human experience in ways both visible and invisible. Every time we read written text, use mathematical notation, live in organized communities, or seek justice through legal procedures, we participate in traditions that began in the marshlands of southern Mesopotamia over 5 millennia ago. They gave humanity its first cities, its earliest writing, its initial literature, its original legal codes, its foundational mathematics, its pioneering monumental architecture, its prototype complex institutions. They demonstrated that people could create forms of social organization more sophisticated than anything the natural world provides, that cooperation could achieve what individual effort could never accomplish, that ideas and values could transcend the mortality of their creators to influence countless generations of descendants. Their legacy lives on not as museum artifacts or scholarly curiosities, but as living elements of civilization that continue growing and adapting to new circumstances. Every settlement, every written document, every mathematical calculation, every legal procedure carries forward their innovations while extending them into realms they could never have imagined. The Sumerian civilization has become all civilizations, its achievements so thoroughly integrated into human experience that they seem natural rather than revolutionary. Yet they remain revolutionary in their demonstration of human potential, their affirmation that creativity and cooperation can transform any environment, overcome any obstacle, and create meaning and beauty from the raw materials of existence itself. In the end, perhaps the greatest gift the Sumerians gave to humanity is simply the proof that such gifts are possible, that ordinary people facing extraordinary challenges can create extraordinary solutions benefiting not only themselves but countless generations of successors they will never meet. Their story continues wherever people gather in communities, seek knowledge, create beauty, pursue justice, or dream of better futures for their children and their children's children. The cradle of civilization has become the foundation of possibility itself.